Good afternoon. I'm Mike Majuk, and welcome to the third episode of What's New with Grant County. Today on the show, we have the privilege of speaking with Alicia Hazelwood. Now, she is the executive director of the United Way here in Grant County. Alicia, great to have you here. And what's new with the United Way here in Grant County?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me today. I'm super excited to be here and let everybody know kind of what's going on with the United Way. And what's new is we are getting ready to kick off our annual giving campaign where we raise about $500,000 for the community. Stays right here in Grant County, so a busy time of the year for that. And because we weren't busy enough, we decided to go ahead and start our strategic plan. So we are trying to figure out what we want to look like over the next 10 years as well. So lots of fun stuff.
Over the next 10 years?
Yes. So the strategic plan hopefully will set some impact goals that we want to hit by 2029, but that is our 100th anniversary. So We're hopeful to set some impact goals and then really work towards hitting those before 2029.
And that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask what are some of the short-term goals of the United Way here in Grant County and the long-term goals? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the United Way has really changed in Grant County over the years. I've been the executive director for the last 7 years. We try to have some more specific impact initiatives.
Okay.
For our United Way, that has ended up being a focus on health, education, and financial stability programming. We don't do any of our own internal programming. We fund that type of work in partner agencies. And so our hope is that as we've moved down this continuum, that with this strategic plan, we will actually have some specific measurable impact goals identified that we can work towards moving those needles over the next 9 to 10 years. Right now, the United Way kind of looks at what's going on in the community. And so we know that we have high childhood poverty. That means that we have a lot of families living in poverty. So a lot of our funding over the last probably 5 to 6 years has really had a focus around who's doing in our community a good job of helping that particular population.
Okay.
So we've been funding a lot of organizations that work in that area. So we fund domestic violence counseling, we fund the Boys and Girls Club, we fund family counseling. Then we noticed that we had a opioid and heroin epidemic going on that's across the news everywhere in our country. Mm-hmm. And so we saw that need. And so we fund some substance abuse programming. We fund some mental health programming while still funding organizations like St. Martin's and Salvation Army that do some basic need services. So really, we've got this really broad brush. And a lot of people have used the terminology that we serve families from cradle to career. So from the time, you're a child, we're doing mentoring programs with 21st Century Scholars and Project Leadership all the way to the time where you can enter into the senior center and you're looking for family and connection, that kind of thing from that type of organization. So real broad brush. What we're hopeful with this strategic plan is that we can identify within that broad brush some particular pieces that are actually measurable that we can track to say we're starting out at, we know that we can impact this number, but it may not be a measurable that we would do. But we know that childhood poverty is at 33% in Grant County.
Right.
Well, if we wanted to impact that number, we could specifically target funding programming that works in how do we lower childhood poverty and track whether that number goes up or down based on the investment that we've made. I don't know what that's going to look like. We're doing a very deep strategic plan. It's going to take about a year to accomplish, and our board and volunteers and community leaders all have an opportunity to give input into that to help us determine what those targets could look like. And so I'm really excited to see what comes out of that and how we look at measuring those issues as well in our community.
So for all you business people out there, this is a return on an investment.
This is correct. Yes.
Okay. So, and it's kind of like, I read on your website some of the great things you guys have done in the education field, educating our children here at Grant County. Now, the high school dropout rate, that is a way that you measured your return on investment with decreasing that high school dropout rate, correct?
Correct. So we could, the organizations could look at high school dropout rate. We could look at third grade reading levels. I have partnered and facilitated the Early Childhood Coalition here in Grant County. And one of the things that we were looking at is children's readiness for kindergarten. So how do we determine whether a child's ready to learn when they hit kindergarten, working with the kindergarten teachers to accomplish that, which is one of the reasons why we partnered so heavily with bringing On My Way Pre-K as a designation here to Grant County as a part of the state pilot.
And the United Way here in Grant County now, I mean, just from talking with you the last few minutes, you guys have your hand in a lot of baskets.
We do. Yeah. I've lovingly referred to us as the octopus of the community because we have all of these tentacles, and we're not trying to, we're just trying to make sure that our donors and the space that they want to give to is honored. I said we raise about $500,000, $2.50 at a time. So 75% of the fundraising that we bring in every year comes from what we call payroll deduction. So an employee in the community can make a pledge to the United Way and have that directly deducted from their paycheck every month or every week or whatever, however they're paid. And so a lot of our donors are not donors that can write a one-time check. They're donors that have to make a gift over a period of time. So we're kind of like charity layaway.
Right.
And in doing that, I want to make sure that those donors are honored in the same way that a major gift donor is honored. So when I'm investing that money as the United Way into our community, I want to make sure it's going to make the biggest difference. The only way to do that is to have your hands or ears or eyes in a little bit of everything so that you know where it's all going. And we don't necessarily fund all of those different things, but we do help. So the Early Childhood Coalition I facilitated, we were a backbone organization of that. So we were a fiscal agent, those kinds of things. But we didn't make, the United Way did not make the decisions for that coalition. That coalition made those decisions. And so there are a lot of different ways to be involved and engaged.
Gotcha. Well, I'm learning stuff about the United Way today. And I read on your website now, it says your mission is to focus support for health, education, and financial stability in Grant County to achieve measurable results by uniting community resources. Now let's go ahead and talk about what are some of the ways you're doing that today here in Grant County.
So I will share that we kind of added 3 words because I felt like the mission, it was a good mission, but it missed the why. Like, for why are we focusing, all these resources? Yeah. And so we added the words to build stronger families. So the United Way's mission is to build stronger families by focusing support. So that gives you the why of why we do what we do.
Yeah.
But the ways that we do that. So when I break it down, so obviously we're focusing support. Support looks like volunteers, funding, backbone organization, those kinds of things. But we know that's where our biggest impact is. To get kind of back around to the question of how do we do that, I would probably say 75% of what we do is that direct support programming. We do have a grant cycle, so I raise money in the fall from the community and for the community. And then in the spring, we have a committee of volunteers and individuals that get together from our community. They read grant applications from nonprofit agencies in Grant County that are working in those 3 pillar areas. We go to each individual organization, take a tour, we review their application, and that committee determines how to divide out the pot of money that's available for funding, and then we fund that programming all year long.
Okay.
Which allows those agencies then the opportunity to know that they've got, at least for that year, a steady stream of income every month that's going to come in to help pay for programming. So it takes a little bit of the burden off of the agency. To know ahead of time, we know we've got this lump sum coming from the United Way spread over 12 months to fund this program. Okay. So when they go out and fundraise, they're either making up the difference of that or they're fundraising for something else because this first program's taken care of.
Gotcha.
So that's our primary way. Like I said before, we do some other things. I coordinate volunteer activities for employers and for nonprofit organizations. We help with volunteerism. We function as a backbone organization. So, for example, when I say that, it means that we're available for use and support. And a real good example that I adore a lot because I come from a military family, Order of Purple Heart in Grant County did not have a physical place to meet. They didn't have a home necessarily. They didn't want to go out to a restaurant because sometimes they're talking about private issues. And so they had met in my previous business office before I came to the United Way. And so when that office closed its doors, I told them, I said, hey, don't worry about where you need to go. You can meet in our office. You can use our
That's so
boardroom.
great.
Yeah, so they meet once a month in our boardroom. We don't charge them anything. I'm already paying for heat and air conditioning and all that sort of stuff. So they come in and we make copies, and I really serve as a backbone place. They've even got a drawer where they store stuff. And we do that for several organizations. And I think that's just a really unique and helpful opportunity for some of our organizations to have, just to know that they've got a place to go if they need it. And then we also can function as a fiscal agent. So if there is an organization that maybe isn't big enough to go after a particular grant, the United Way can write as a partner on that grant.
Wow.
Bring that in. The money runs through our books so the organization can focus on doing the programming while the United Way deals with the financials and stuff like that of tracking the grant. So there's a lot of different ways that we can partner.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, but more from Alicia Hazelwood, the Executive Director of the United Way here in Grant County. When we come back, don't go anywhere. You're listening to What's New with Grant County right here on 94.3 The Fortress, creating community. Welcome back to What's New with Grant County. I'm your host, Mike Majuk, and we've been talking with Alicia Hazelwood. She's the Executive Director of the United Way here in Grant County. So, Alicia, earlier we were talking, and you mentioned something about the 3 pillars of the United Way. What are the 3 pillars?
Our 3 pillars as United Ways are give, volunteer, advocate. And so for me, the advocate piece personally is just a really strong point for me. I can encourage people to donate, and I can encourage people to volunteer and create volunteer opportunities. But when it comes to advocating, it's really important that everybody gets to have their voice. And so that's something that is very true to me personally. It's something that I'm very passionate about. And so I love the fact that that's a piece of my job.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so now your vision states, United Way of Grant County envisions a caring community working together to improve the lives of all people. Now, where are we succeeding with this vision? And where can we do better?
Yeah, so I think we're really succeeding with this vision in the fact there are a lot of people and organizations that do work together to try and make sure that our families are taken care of and get what they need. If they're struggling, if they're being successful, whenever you ask anybody what's so special about Grant County, you're always told the people here are exceptional. We cannot reproduce what it is that Grant County has as far as the people, the networks, and the connections that we have here. So I think we're doing that really well. As far as where I think we're struggling, there are a lot of barriers that our families face being a rural community. And so access to transportation, access to health care, a lot of the resources that we would use to support families that are struggling are centrally located because that's where the biggest population is in our county, but that may not be where the population is that needs some of the help the most. So we're trying to figure out how do we bring those 2 pieces together. So how do we help families that are struggling, that are in Fairmount, that are in Upland, Van Buren, Converse, Sweetser, Swayze, kind of the outlying areas, because a lot of the resources are hubbed in Marion and Gas City. And so trying to figure that out and make sure that everyone has the same access when they need it to resources has been a struggle. We're trying to come up with some solutions to that right now, trying to make sure that we're building networks and spaces of trust where people can get together, talk about the hard issues, talk about topics that may be a little challenging, and coming at it from a place of understanding and grace to allow for us to say, maybe this isn't working quite right. Maybe it's working really great, but there's ways that we could tweak it to where it'd be a little more effective, a little bit more efficient, and honoring each other's space at the table. And so in some of the ways that I think we're struggling, at least there's a recognition that we need to work better in those areas.
What do you think the biggest issue here in Grant County is?
I don't necessarily know that there is one problem, which is a big struggle for us. We know that we've got a lot of people living in poverty. Our community is transferring from being a manufacturing community where you could graduate from high school, go to work in one of the plants, and make a decent salary and support your family until retirement. those types of jobs just don't exist in our community anymore. We know that we've got a huge substance abuse epidemic. We know that we have high child poverty numbers. We have high smoking numbers. We have health concerns and issues here in our community. So there's not necessarily one problem that we're trying to address, which then gets to be really hard because as your community starts to struggle, the pot of wealth and resources that you can draw from to help those individuals, the charity that's available, the philanthropy that's available also becomes fewer and fewer people. Right. And so there's a struggle there in that we really don't have the broadness of resources that our nonprofits need to be able to really make sizable impacts on those populations. So it gets really, really complicated in how do we maximize the gifts that we do have, which are very generous. We're one of the most generous counties in the entire state of Indiana. And so how do we work together to maximize those to really make measurable impact for the future of our community while still having enough to support those that are struggling today? So that piece of it becomes something that we have to be very thoughtful about. We have to sit around the room and have some of those real tough conversations about we can't save everybody. So what is the right answer? Where do we start? And sometimes you just have to say, we're going to start here and see what happens. That giving back piece, I think, is something that's amazing about our community. And as more people find that trust space to start sharing what their ideal community would look like or what they aspire to in our community, I always tell people, think about if I could have anything where I live right now, what would it be? And set that as a goal and then say, okay, so how are we going to work to that? How are we going to get there? What are the barriers for that? And when we're thinking about a family that's struggling, say their husband lost their job and, there might be addiction in the house or those kinds of things. And you've got these kids struggling with this life that they didn't get to choose that they were in. You end up with the stress of trying to figure out, how do I put food on the table? You're not thinking about rent's due next month, or if Jimmy breaks his leg, how am I going to pay for that? Right. Because you're literally looking towards just tomorrow. And so as we bring organizations to the table that deal with these families day to day, in and out, and we bring in the hospital and we bring in the school systems and we bring in their church leaders, it starts to change the conversation because you're now not just dealing with the fact that Jimmy's parents can't pay the hospital for his leg being broken. We're addressing that mom had a pill addiction and dad's lost his job and grandma just moved in because she has Alzheimer's and all of these other things that are going on, and treating that family as a whole piece instead of just its parts, I think is a really cool movement that's going on right now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so great to hear about. Now, there's people listening that they're like, I want to help. How can I get involved? How can somebody help here in the community with United Way?
Yeah, so there are a number of different ways that you can get involved with making a difference. If I have an individual that's like, oh, I'm really passionate, I want to get involved, how do I volunteer? Yeah. My first comment is to call the United Way and sit down and talk with me. We'll go have a coffee and I'll find out what you're passionate about, what you love to do, and what you like to do in your spare time. Because we find a lot of individuals, and I use my poor board members as examples, that if you're a banker, the likelihood is a board is going to put you on their board and ask you to do the banking, trustee, be the treasurer or whatever. Right. And that may not be what you're passionate about. Maybe you like doing marketing, but you just ended up in finance. Right. So I always ask people what they're passionate about. What do you like to do? And we match those two things together. So because I have all of these tentacles and all of these different things going on. Yep. When you tell me you like elderly people, or you like reading to children, or you love being a Sunday school teacher, or I love doing photography, or I love gardening, I know which organizations would be good to put you in touch with so that you're getting the experience that's going to fill your heart while also filling a need for the community.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite things to do at the United Way, and I get all excited and geeked out when people are like, oh, I loved doing this. Now, if you have a big group, and I always said that no group was too big. However, I help organize volunteer opportunities for Indiana Wesleyan's football team, and it just being me, they're the max I can do.
Right.
If it was not for Jordan, Coach Langs, and his coaching staff, there'd be way too many people for me to manage. But we are able to put together volunteer opportunities for large groups. And I do the same thing. I talk to either the coaches or the, organizers of the group to say, what experience do you want your team to have, whether it's an athletic team or an employer team. And then we go out and find that particular opportunity for them. So it's a lot of fun. I love seeing that type of work happen because it's a way of giving back. I mean, it's not money, it's talent, right?
That's right. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, but more from Alicia Hazelwood. She is the executive director of the United Way here in Grant County. We're having a great conversation, so stay with us. I'm Mike Majuk, and you're listening to What's New with Grant County right here on 94.3 The Fortress, creating community. Welcome back to the third episode of What's New with Grant County. Now, we've been talking with Alicia Hazelwood. She's the executive director of the United Way here in Grant County. Now, before the break, Alicia, we were talking about how not only can people donate their time, but they can do so by doing something they are really passionate about. So, in a way, your organization is giving back to the giver by doing this, right?
Yes, absolutely. I always want to make sure that our volunteers have the experience that they're looking for so that they're more likely to volunteer in the future.
Right.
And if we put them in a good experience initially, the likelihood that they're going to continue to volunteer is much better. So, for example, I spoke with the baseball coach here at Indiana Wesleyan, and the baseball team volunteered, but the coach wanted the baseball team to have one-on-one interactions with families. Mm-hmm. So one of the families we worked with was a single mom. She lived in Gas City. She had 4 kids, and she was excited. She had just bought her own house, and she wanted to be able to enjoy her backyard. And there were some things happening that weren't allowing that to happen. So we went over, got the permits, and the baseball team built a privacy fence for her. They got to know her kids and her family and see the appreciation from her.
Right.
And you would think, oh, well, they just built a fence. They didn't just build a fence. They understood the privacy that they provided her, the safety that she could now let her kids out in the backyard and play and not
Right.
worry about them running into the neighbors' yards or into the road, those kinds of things, because some of her kids were younger.
Right.
And it was a real sense of community around. We're providing this safe space for them to be a family. And then we have opportunities where with the football team, Jordan said that he wanted to make a big impact in downtown Marion. He just wanted to go in with all of these kids and just do something where when you were done, you were like, wow, we accomplished that. So one year we went downtown and we cleaned up downtown. We painted curbs and fire hydrants and got all the weeds out of the cracks of the sidewalks and cleaned the gutters. And when you turned around and looked at downtown, we did, I think, 10 city blocks or something like that. Of course, we had 120 guys that year.
Makes it easier.
Makes it a little easier.
Yep.
And we partnered with the city to do that. The city provided the supplies because they have so the street department for the city of Marion, I think now is at 8 guys, and they manage all the streets and all the city parks. And so with 8 guys, you're not going to get to all that stuff. So they provided all the supplies. We came in with the labor, and you looked around, and when you drove into downtown, it looked beautiful. It looked clean and maintained and picked up and no trash. And it was one of those things where those guys were able to look back and say, wow, that's amazing. Right. And we actually had, out of nowhere, a lady and her husband apparently had saw the guys, and it was hot outside, saw the guys out, doing all this stuff. And they went down to the little Family Dollar that's in downtown and bought cups and ice and it wasn't soda, it was in the gallon jugs, juice and lemonade or whatever, and put it in their trunk, drove back around and popped their trunk and said, "We appreciate you doing so much for our community. Here, have a glass of lemonade on us."
Right.
And it was just an amazing opportunity for the students and the athletes to feel that spontaneous generosity back to them for what they were doing. So they're some of my favorite opportunities. I've had people say, oh, it's just painting a fence or it's just painting a park or whatever.
Don't listen to them.
But it's when you're a part of it, it is absolutely amazing. I think the experience that people get, and coming from Indiana Wesleyan, knowing that there's a mission around being a world changer. If I can encourage anybody to understand that they don't have to go, if they get called somewhere else, then fantastic. Go where you're called. But wherever you end up, you can be a world changer right there. So in Grant County at Indiana Wesleyan University, you can look right across 38th Street and see neighborhoods that need help and engagement and just a little bit of love and tenderness, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad you're here, and we're glad you're making the difference that you are.
Thank you.
And I'm really happy to hear about how United Way. I mean, you guys don't have a primary focus in just one area. You kind of do it all.
It's really good, I think, for someone like B who's a little ADD. I think if I had one thing to do, I'd get bored. Right. We are in so many realms and fields, and we serve at so many different levels.
Any upcoming events? I know when we were speaking earlier, you guys don't really do a lot of just events by yourselves, right? But
right. So I'm a staff of 2, myself and an office manager. So event fundraising can be pretty difficult and time consuming when it's just the 2 of us. Right. We do partner with Concerts in the Park in Gas City, and we do an event called Rock the Way. It's the last concert of this summer. We just had that about a week ago. Mm-hmm. We had Unspoken in, and so it was a great event, lots of fun. We do have our kickoff breakfast coming up, which is hosted by Marion General Hospital and Edward Jones, Bobby Browder's office. And we do have an annual meeting in the spring where we kind of report out, here's some of the stories that we've been able to collect over the year. But no real big events or anything that we do, again, because we've got such a broad brush. A lot of times my job is really just making sure people are in the right spots at the right time to help in the way that they're passionate. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
But who knows, right?
Who knows?
94.3 The Fortress and United Way combining efforts.
We could.
A team, we could totally do it.
We could totally do it, and I'm always excited to build new partnerships.
Right on. Okay, so anything else you'd like to add today, Alicia?
Just thank you so much for having me on and sharing our story. And if anybody out there is interested in getting a hold of us so that we can partner, maybe you want to volunteer or you've got a great idea, just give me a call at 765-662-9811, and we'll talk to you and see what we can help you do.
Boom. Got it. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. We've been talking with Alicia Hazelwood, the Executive Director of the United Way here in Grant County. We learned some really amazing things about the United Way today, but probably one of my favorite, and that stuck out to me the most, if you're wanting to give back to the community and, you're passionate about something, which we all are, the United Way can help find a way for you to give back to our community that is in your area of passion. So make sure you give the United Way a call today and find out how you can give back and help our community. As Alicia said, the number is 765-662-9811. And if you happen to join us towards the end and want to hear the entire interview, there will be a link on our Facebook page. So make sure you check it out. We covered a lot of important stuff today. Well, that's all we got for now. I'm Mike Mijuk, and you've been listening to What's New with Grant County right here on 94.3 The Fortress. Creating community.